Hello gardener, welcome to my channel. Every month I do a garden guide which gives you tons of ideas on everything you can plant right now to help keep you on track. This month's garden guide for July continues planting some things, but it is time to start planting and sowing seeds for your fall garden. Yes, I know it's the middle of summer and the last thing you're thinking about is fall, but July is when I start sowing seeds to grow out transplants for my fall tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, among other things. It's a very busy month for me, so I'm going to give you lots of planting ideas for July and also explain my game plan when it comes to sowing seeds for fall. If you're new here, hello and welcome. My name is Jara. I've been gardening all of my life and I'm a professional seed and plant nursery. I love to share my knowledge and teach others how to garden and grow food. So you've come to the right place if you want to improve your gardening skills. Just so you know, I am doing a free live garden class right here on YouTube on Sunday, July 7th, weather permitting, at 6 p.m. Eastern time, teaching about sowing seeds for your fall garden. So if that's something you struggle with or you just want to learn my technique, I'd be happy to show you in that class. And before we begin, I want you to relax and enjoy this video. I provide a lot of planting ideas, so I created a free printable PDF checklist with all the crops I'm about to mention so you don't miss a single one. To get it, please follow the link in the description and I'll email it to you. Anyways, let's get started with the crops you can plant or start from seed right now in July. The first set of crops I want to talk about is squash and cucumbers because they have similar requirements and issues. If you direct sow seeds right now, you will be harvesting in about 2.5 to 3 or 4 months depending on the type of squash or cucumber. If it's like a zucchini, patty pan squash, or pickling cucumber, which are a smaller fruiting size type of cucumber, they produce earlier than the larger size squash like banana or butternut squash, for example. You should start harvesting in September or a little bit beyond, which is perfect for a fall harvest. The biggest issue is that it's still summer and the disease and pest pressure is at its highest. So getting these things to grow is very difficult, especially if you're a new gardener and don't quite yet know how to manage them. You have to really watch and baby the seedlings once they germinate and take care of them so they grow to maturity and start producing. For caterpillar damage, the kind that chew up the leaves, spray with BT or spinosad. For sucking pests like squash bugs, you'll have to manually remove the adults, squish the eggs, or spray the nymphs with spinosad. And then they get lots of diseases like powdery mildew. Just spray with 1 cup of hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water to treat for leaf diseases. If you think you can baby these plants, then go ahead and start direct sowing seeds in the month of July. If not, then I recommend you sow 1 to 2 seeds in a 4-inch size pot indoors. That way the seedlings are protected from the pests and diseases for a little bit. Transplant them out once they get bigger and start to fill out the 4-inch size pot. This helps increase their chances of survival. Or just wait a little bit longer before planting. If you have very mild winters, no snow, and your first winter frost is in December or beyond, you can wait to direct sow seeds later in August. I know a lot of you appreciate that I give specific cultivar recommendations because when you're shopping for seeds, there are so many to choose from. So this is what I recommend for squash and cucumbers being planted in July. Choose squash in one of these 2 groups. I say it all the time. These types of squash have tougher wood-like stems that resist pests and they handle the heat better. As far as cucumbers, I recommend hybrids that have a good disease resistance package or any of the Asian cucumbers because they grow much better in the heat of summer. There also is the Indian snake cucumber, which is actually a melon, but it can be substituted for cucumbers and it also grows really well in the heat. I wait for things to cool down a little bit more to grow traditional cucumbers or pickling cucumbers. For me, that will be in September. And just a pro tip, I use black weed blocking material around my garden to help suppress weeds. I noticed it blocks a lot of pests that live in the soil surface or in mulch, like squash bugs, from getting onto my squash or cucumber plants. It really helps reduce the amount of pests they get. So lay down some black weed blocker material, burn holes into it with a hand torch, and then direct sow or transplant your squash or cucumbers in the holes. That way, these plants will ramble and sprawl out over the weed blocker material instead of coming into contact with the soil and pests. It won't get rid of all of them, but it helps reduce their numbers. July is the last chance for those of you that still have a solid 4 to 5 months left before your first winter frost date to continue planting okra. They thrive in the heat and produce over and over again until basically the cold or a pest or disease kills the plants. Next, let's talk about beans. It is still too hot to direct sow seeds for traditional pole or bush beans, so I recommend heat-loving tropical bean alternatives like yard-long beans, cowpeas, or southern peas, any bean grown to dry and shell out its seeds for storage like black beans and winged beans. I know winged beans look scary, but they taste great and have a crunchy texture. I will direct sow regular bean seeds in September once things have cooled down a little bit. Cowpeas and southern peas actually make a great option for sowing in containers or in green stock garden towers like what I have right here. It can be difficult finding edible crops that will grow well in one of these towers during the summer because they have to be heat and drought tolerant, so cowpeas and southern peas fit fit that bill. This is a tower full of pink-eyed purple hull peas, and they're doing very well. Next is a few crop ideas just for gardeners in zones 9 and up, because the rest of you in colder climates don't have enough warm weather months remaining to grow these to harvest. And that's LUFFA, snake bean gourd, and moringa. Hurry up and transplant or direct sow seeds for LUFFA. July is the last month I have to plant some if I want to harvest before my first frost arrives at the end of December. LUFFA is a vigorous vine with huge yellow flowers that attracts loads of pollinators. It produces gourds that when dried and peeled become LUFFA sponges. So a very fun and useful plant. But did you know they're also edible? If you harvest them young, like no more than 7 inches long, they are edible and taste very similar to zucchini. Then we have the snake bean gourd. Sounds weird, looks weird, but is super delicious. It tastes like the best green bean you will ever have. It is a large vining plant, kind of like LUFFA. It thrives in the heat, and just one gourd provides a lot of food. It kind of looks like the Indian snake cucumber that I mentioned earlier, but they are not the same. The Indian snake bean is a gourd that tastes like green beans. The snake cucumber is a melon that tastes like cucumbers. Moringa is not a gourd like LUFFA or the snake bean gourd, but it's a tropical heat-loving plant. I like to sow seeds and transplant them all throughout the summer so they grow and get to a decent size before my winter arrives. The bigger they are by the time winter arrives, the better they can handle the cold. These crops can be difficult to start from seed. They need heat and humidity for good germination. I do have a few tutorials showing my setup to get better germination for LUFFA and moringa, which I will link in the description below. It is still too hot to plant traditional greens like lettuce, so here are my recommendations for heat-tolerant leafy greens. Or you can get some grow lights, maybe a grow tent, and try growing lettuce indoors. If they have enough light, lettuce will grow very well indoors at room temperature. Some of these greens are easily grown from seed, like Molokia and New Zealand spinach, while others are usually propagated by cuttings, so then you would need a plant. I have almost all of these greens growing in my garden, and I sell plants for a lot of them on my website. In general, they all taste like a mild lettuce. None of them have a noticeably strong flavor, except for shisho, which to me has an anise or mint type of flavor. I recommend you harvest the younger tender leaves for the best flavor and texture. A lot of these are also perennial plants, as long as it doesn't get too cold, and have more nutrients when compared to lettuce. For example, katuk and moringa have some of the highest amounts of plant protein by weight. Up next, we have flowers. I like to mix flowers into my edible crop plantings because they support pollinators and attract beneficial insects. These flowers right here are the most heat and drought tolerant ideas I could come up with, so continue direct sowing seeds or transplanting them during the month of July. I use square foot gardening guidelines to space out my veggie crops, so every 4 or so veggies that I plant in a row, I skip one spot to save that space to plant some sort of a flower or herb. So for example, square foot gardening says plant 1 cauliflower plant every square foot. After 4 cauliflower plants in a row, I skip and plant a flower or herb in that spot. This is a great technique to help bring in pollinators right up into your veggie crops for better pollination. Herbs are a little tricky right now if your summers are extremely hot, like consistently over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. They don't grow very well in high heat, so wait to interplant herbs with your veggie crops in the fall, winter if you grow year-round like me, or spring. Right now you can plant tropical heat-loving herbs like these right here. You could interplant these tropical herbs, but just be careful because some of these get really big in size, like the Cuban oregano and lemongrass. So not a good idea to plant them right up into your veggie crops. Herbs that grow from rhizomes like ginger, shampoo ginger, turmeric, and galangal also get very big. I like to grow them in containers or grow bags to control the spread of their rhizomes under the ground, or they would overtake my entire garden. It also makes harvesting super easy because I just dump out the container. Some of you might not believe me, but you can grow corn even during a very hot summer. It's a little challenging, but possible. Cultivar selection is super important. Sweet corn is harder to grow during high heat conditions than dent, flint, maize, or popcorn. So choose one of those varieties if you decide to direct sow seeds for corn right now in July. This is my Mayan white maize corn patch. I chose to grow this during the summer because it has a very high heat tolerance and pest resistance. I barely got any corn earworm damage with it as compared to when I grow sweet corn. It's not a sweet corn though. It's a maize that is best used to make corn flour or masa for tortillas. Let's talk about some root crops. If you have at minimum 3 months before your first winter frost date, or maybe your winters are so mild you don't even get a frost, like some of you zone 11 people, you can continue to plant sweet potato slips. Fertilize well to get them to grow as big as possible. You should harvest sometime before Thanksgiving. If you're in a subtropical or tropical climate with mild winters, no snow, and your ground does not freeze, so like some zone 9 people and then all of zone 10, 11, 12, and 13, you can continue to plant the super tropical root crops like these right here. These are tropical crops that will not be ready for harvest until probably probably next year. So that means they will be growing during the winter. If they are exposed to too much cold, they will die. So that is why I say only plant these if you're in garden zones 9 and up. If you want to harvest roselle calices during the fall, then you need to plant some right now in July. I would say this is the last month to hurry up and transplant some. It's getting way too late to just be starting them from seed, and that is because they need many months in a row of growing time to get as large and bushy as possible. When the daylight hours start to decrease in fall, it triggers them to start flowering and producing calices. It is what we call a daylight sensitive plant. So the bigger the plant is, by this point, the bigger your harvest. This is your reminder to hurry up and plant some roselle now. I do have a tutorial that teaches everything you need to know about growing roselle, which I will link in the description below. Okay, let's talk about all the things you need to start from seed this month so they are transplant ready by the time you start planting your fall garden. Again, I will be discussing this in my live garden class on July 7th. These crops take a very long time to get to transplant size, so you have to backtrack and start them 2 or 3 months before your target date to plant them into the garden. First is onions and leeks. If you're in a mild winter climate, barely any frost and definitely no snow, then you grow onions and leeks during the fall, winter, and spring like me. They just take forever to germinate and get to transplant size. I like to give them 3 to 4 months time. My target date to transplant them into the garden is October and November, so I sow seeds now in July. I have a tutorial all about growing onions from seed, which I will link below. Lastly, we have tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. If you can grow a fall crop of these, then July is the time to start sowing the seed. However, they get stunted in growth if exposed to high heat, which is exactly the situation outside right now. Therefore, I have to grow the seedlings indoors. That's the secret. I just take one of my mini greenhouses that I get from Amazon and roll it into my house in some back corner for a few weeks. They will require supplemental light for this to work. I attach some lights to the shelves of my mini greenhouse with some zip ties. For many years, I used to use 5,000 Kelvin or higher shop lights, which are okay. With those, my tomato seedlings took 10 to 12 weeks to be ready. Recently though, I switched to using official grow lights. I'm using these Mars Hydro grow lights that I get from Amazon, and it significantly reduced the growing time. My tomatoes are ready in 6 to 8 weeks now. Peppers and eggplants grow much slower from seed than tomatoes. They usually take 2 to 3 months, even with grow lights. My game plan is to transplant tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants at the end of August or no later than early September, usually Labor Day weekend. That way they have enough time to grow and produce a harvest before my first winter frost. You can find a written version of this guide to save, copy, paste, or print on the monthly gardening guide section of my website. Or sign up for my email group. There's a link in the description, and I'll automatically send it to you at the beginning of each month. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a big thumbs up. You have no idea how much that helps out my channel. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. That way you get notified of when I post new videos. I recommend you watch this video all about my seed sowing setup next, so you can start getting prepared for fall sowing this season. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.